Hello, this is my response for discussion board 7 for week 7 and 8 for intersections of poverty, disposability, indigenous knowledge, individual post. Yeah, I really enjoyed those TED Talks, the reading as well. I'm not a big fan of the readings, gotta be honest, but it was one of the more interesting ones. It was much easier to stick through, especially how it related pretty strongly to the second TED Talk. There were some strong parallels there. But I guess I'll just start off in chronological order here for the order you gave us. So the first TED Talk about environmental justice, biomimicry, and social justice, Van Jones. That was my more favorite of the two. I thought he was a really good speaker. From public speaking class, he's crushing it in that department. Especially how he kind of use dry humor to emphasize his points. Although I wish on a few topics he kind of stressed some of the underlying issues. Like when he talked about recycling and stuff and a lot of that stuff, I wish he kind of talked about some of the systemic things that cause it, and especially pollution. Like recycling as an idea for you recycle at home, reduce, reuse, reduce, recycle. A lot of those are slogans and propaganda created by oil companies and those big OPEC companies because it focus on yourself, not us. Even if every American recycled perfectly, obviously it'd be a large dent, but the biggest dent by far is just large scale corporations need to cut back, and it's pretty easy to do. We can just tax them at all, or more for the damage that they're doing, and then just make it no longer economically viable for them to keep polluting and producing at the levels they are. Then they'd stop. It's really that simple. But he kind of more went into the individual, which is still really important and all, but I do wish he kind of touched on the, capitalist framework that causes a lot of it, and is kind of the root cause for a lot of things he was talking about. Even when he went into, criminal justice reform, a lot of people like prisoners for labor. That is a large reason the U.S. has such a high incarceration rate, because it's modern day slavery and large corporations make a lot of money by using prisoners for labor. That's what it went: slavery, sharecropping, and then prisons, pretty much. Obviously, I'm oversimplifying it there, but the reason that one of the big reasons that we have such a ridiculous prison population is, obviously racism is a large factor of it, but it's for capital interests. The government isn't just putting people in prison because they want to pay the money to feed someone and house someone. Not that it's expensive or they're getting good food or housing, but it's because it's very profitable for a lot of companies. It's great for a lot of them. They're just disenfranchising voters that they don't agree with. I wish he kind of went into the framework about it versus individual. He started to at the end a little bit. And I'm sure if I were to watch some of his longer speeches, he'd get into it more. Because obviously it's pretty hard to talk about such a big issue in 12 minutes. So I don't blame him for it. I just kind of wish he kind of touched on the corporation side of things. Because from my understanding, which is obviously quite limited, so I could be off, he could be way on, and the individual is more important. I've always read and heard that a lot of the reuse, reduce, recycle stuff is basically just oil company propaganda to get you focused on yourself, not on them. It's still good to do, but I remember this year it came out that a lot of this city of Seattle's supposed recycling, which wasn't being recycled, it was a huge percentage. Anything with any bit of contamination, they were just tossing. Like he was saying, on boats to China where they burn it, or here where they burn it, and a lot of other problems like that. So, yeah, I mean, I that was just a little constructive criticism, a little bit off the point. For the second TED Talk with Peggy Shepard, I thought it was really cool and informative, especially the historical angle, because I'm pretty aware of a lot of modern stuff, but my knowledge is honestly lacking in a lot of historical aspects. Some of the imagery she showed was really cool, especially with the old mayor protesting with them and getting arrested. I kind of wish we had more politicians like that today. We have so many gutless, empty politicians that just blindly follow what their donors say. If also getting off point again, but if you look at any politician on an issue, you can to a really high degree of certainty, decide what they're going to vote based on like one or two super PACs, if they donate to them or not. Like, if you look at a politician who has like pretty strong and clear morals on like the war in Ukraine or different war, you look at the mass war crimes in Gaza on the Palestinians, and if they have huge OPEC funding, then they're like, turn it into a parking lot, So I did think it was cool to see politicians that have a backbone and understanding. And I also really liked for the next bit, for the as long as the grass grows, environmental justice theory and its limitations for indigenous peoples. Also, again, how it referenced a lot of historical acts, and it's kind of a bummer to see a lot of the historical acts they reference just like get blatantly violated nowadays. Like it said, what was it? I'm trying to get the exact year. I just had the excerpt up, but talking about advocating for strong environmental, the Clean Water Act that the CBC advocated for, and like it was advocated for by the Black Caucus, or Congressional Black Caucus, and recently it's been horribly violated in Black communities. That's really sad to see. In 1972, we understood this was a problem and should be addressed, and 50 years later, we're still not addressing it. I'm pretty sure Flint still doesn't have clean water. Large parts of the U.S. have really contaminated water. Even L.A., which is like the suburbs of L.A., like rich white areas, like Hollywood, doesn't have good tap water. So it's kind of a bummer to see that we knew this was a problem in 1970 and have still failed to address it, which is a little bit disheartening, but hopefully, in the next 50 years, something will change. Probably not, but hopefully it will. But yeah, I really enjoyed this reading, especially all the historical references and really filling in some of my lapses in knowledge. Like, I was aware of a lot of the big things I talked about, like I'm blanking on his name. How am I forgetting this? I gotta find it really quick. Sorry about this. Cesar Chavez, with uniting farm workers to fight for better working conditions. But like I don't, some of it, I wish it kind of emphasized unionization and like, not to use too much, but like organization of the proletariat to improve working conditions and I guess living conditions. Because that's what that is at the end of the day. It's like if you give corporations free reign, they're going to take everything they can and do everything they can. They're going to poison the workers because they don't care. They're going to discriminate against the workers as long as it makes them profit because they don't care. But a lot of these leaders that it references were very against that, were pro-workers organizing, unionizing, and fighting for rights, which was cool, but it's cool they mentioned that, but I wish they'd focus slightly more on that, because it's very related to the rest of the text. I also thought it was kind of weird that it gave, nods to Bill Clinton, saying he issued the federal act to address environmental justice, minority populations, because Bill Clinton did not do a good job on that. He's war on drugs. He was horrible for a lot of minority communities. I'm sure this bill was great, or maybe it was great, especially for the time, which is kind of a weird thing to say, because it's it wasn't that long ago. People knew better then, but I just thought it was weird that on page 20 it kind of gave props to Bill Clinton. That kind of rubbed me the wrong way. He's not horrible. Yeah, he is horrible. He's not as bad as some other people. He's not Reagan. He didn't destroy the middle class or anything, but he did perpetrate some awful ideas. I believe he said a lot of super predator stuff. A lot of stuff targeted at marginalized communities, war on drugs, selling crack to black communities, overseeing, some pretty gnarly stuff in the U.S. alone, especially towards POCs and indigenous communities. So I thought it was kind of odd to give props to Bill Clinton. But other than that, I thought it was really interesting, and I really enjoyed the section about environmental justice frameworks in the capitalist state. I enjoyed that they went into that in much more detail than in the Van Jones, I believe was his name. Let me double check. I don't want to get that wrong. Where's the tab? Yeah, the Van Jones video. I enjoyed that they went much more in on it tying into a capitalist framework. Because it's intrinsically linked, and if you don't mention that link, you're really not doing it justice to some extent. I mean, you can still do a great job. Like, I thought that Van Jones' job was great. I see my video's freezing here and stuttering. I hope my audio's fine. I guess that's a sign for me to wrap it up. I've been yapping too long. But yeah, overall, I really enjoyed all three. I did wish that Van Jones had like another 20 minutes in his. I'm sure he has some talks out there somewhere where he does, like at a college campus or something, where he could have gone into how his ideas tie into the larger framework, because they are very linked to that. And I think it's pretty hard to talk about a lot of those subjects without talking about the framework. Like, it's almost like he's like tiptoeing around it at some points. I don't think intentionally, because you have to make it digestible, and as soon as you start talking about like capitalist framework or anything, like half America is like, oh, commie and like all that stuff. So I understand why, but I do wish he talked about that, especially when you're talking about climate issues and criminal justice reform. It's like pretty intrinsically linked to capital owners in the U.S. and the system set up to benefit them. So I kind of wish he talked a little bit more about that. But I really enjoyed it, especially one thing that was really interesting for the Van Jones one, I don't think I mentioned at the beginning, was how he talked about in the creation, use, and disposal, poor communities are often affected more. I was aware of in creation, wasn't as aware of in use, but I mean, that makes sense. Like, I went to Target yesterday, 2 days ago, getting some deodorant, aluminum free, no cancer or whatever. And so they had like a plastic free deodorant, like the stick was paper or whatever. So, oh, that's cool. I was like, oh, that's $12 for one stick of deodorant. So I definitely see how the more wealthy you are, the more affluent you are, the easier it would be to escape plastic contamination and just other contaminations in general. So that makes sense. But it was, very disheartening to see how much more plastic affects poor communities in creation, use, and disposal. That was very unfortunate to see. Also, one thing he didn't talk about there, which I've read and heard about, which is interesting, is microplastics disproportionately affecting indigenous communities, especially indigenous people in Alaska, I believe it was. Yeah, Alaska, and then northern Canada as well, because they primarily eat like apex predators, like salmon, and in some cases whales, not very commonly nowadays because restrictions and stuff, but some tribes still do hunt, like gray whale. I think it's gray whale. I'm not very educated on my whales, but gray whale. But yeah, they did a study where they were trying to see how contaminants for not just microplastics, but also farm pesticides affect people near farms. Like, oh, let's get a base group. Like, who will have the least contamination? So they went up to the indigenous people in Alaska to get like the base level, and they had ridiculously high levels because all the salmon and stuff they were eating had very high concentrated amounts. Because since salmon's a apex predator, not apex predator, but a predator, pretty high up in the food chain. It's like second tier above the top in that big pyramid. It's accumulating all of the contamination from the things it's eaten. Because when it eats some food, it'll take its nutrients and use them up and excrement out the back. But all the pollutants from that animal will stay in it, like the microplastics, and I think even like DHT, like the stuff that was messing with eel eggs was from the fish they were eating, and all that stuff. And it had really high levels of that from Eskimos, wrong term. Indigenous people of Alaska had very high levels of contamination in their breast milk for babies, which was really impactful. Somewhat like in the albatross video, on young people and animals that are developing. It has a pretty heavy impact. So I kind of wish one of the things that talked about that, because that was a pretty interesting story that I read. But yeah, sorry for my infinite rambling. But yeah, that's it. Thank you.